Relax and listen to the voice. Hello everyone, and welcome back to the channel. This installment is volume 18 of the fairy tales of Hans Christian Andersen. We hope you enjoy these stories. Please like this video and subscribe to the channel. And with that, here we go. Under the Willow Tree. The region round the little town of Kyoji is very bleak and cold. The town lies on the seashore, which is always beautiful, but here it might be more beautiful than it is, for on every side the fields are flat, and it is a long way to the forest. But when persons reside in a place and get used to it, they can always find something beautiful in it, something for which they long. Even in the most charming spot in the world which is not home, it must be owned that there are in the outskirts of the town some humble gardens on the banks of a little stream that runs on toward the sea, and in summer these gardens look very pretty. Such indeed was the opinion of two little children whose parents were neighbors, and who played in these gardens, and forced their way from one garden to the other through the gooseberry bushes that divided them. In one of the gardens grew an elder tree, and in the other an old willow, under which the children were very fond of playing. They had permission to do so, although the tree stood close by the stream, and they might easily have fallen into the water. But the eye of God watches over the little ones, otherwise they would never be safe. At the same time, these children were very careful not to go too near the water. Indeed, the boy was so afraid of it that in the summer, while the other children were splashing about in the sea, nothing could entice him to join them. They jeered and laughed at him, and he was obliged to bear it all as patiently as he could. Once, the neighbor's little girl, Joanna, dreamed that she was sailing in a boat, and the boy, Nude was his name, waded out into the water to join her, and the water came up to his neck, and at last closed over his head, and in a moment he had disappeared. When little Nude heard this dream, it seemed as if he could not bear the mocking and jeering again. How could he dare to go into the water now, after Joanna's dream? He never would do it, for this dream always satisfied him. The parents of these children, who were poor, often sat together while Nude and Joanna played in the gardens or in the road. Along this road, a row of willow trees had been planted to separate it from a ditch on one side of it. They were not very handsome trees, for the tops had been cut off. However, they were intended for use and not for show. The old willow tree in the garden was much handsomer, and therefore the children were very fond of sitting under it. The town had a large marketplace, and at the fair time there would be whole rows, like streets, of tents and booths containing silken ribbons and toys and cakes and everything that could be wished for. There were crowds of people, and sometimes the weather would be rainy and splash with moisture the woolen jackets of the peasants, but it did not destroy the beautiful fragrance of the honey cakes and gingerbread with which one booth was filled. And the best of it was that the man who sold these cakes always lodged during the fair time with little Nude's parents, so every now and then he had a present of gingerbread, and of course Joanna always had a share. And more delightful still, the gingerbread seller knew all sorts of things to tell, and he could even relate stories about his own gingerbread. So one evening he told them a story that made such a deep impression on the children that they never forgot it, and therefore I think we may as well hear it too, for it is not very long. "Once upon a time," said he, "there lay on my counter 2 gingerbread cakes, one in the shape of a man wearing a hat, the other of a maiden with a bonnet. Their faces were on the side that was uppermost, for on the other side they looked very different. Most people have a best side to their character, which they take care to show to the world. On the left, just where the heart is, the gingerbread man had an almond stuck in to represent it, but the maiden was honey cake all over. They were placed on the counter as samples, and after lying there a long time, they at last fell in love with each other, but neither of them spoke of it to the other, as they should have done if they expected anything to follow. He is a man, he ought to speak the first word, thought the gingerbread maiden, but she felt quite happy. She was sure that her love was returned. But his thoughts were far more ambitious, as the thoughts of a man often are. He dreamed that he was a real street boy, that he possessed 4 real pennies, and that he had bought the gingerbread lady and ate her up. And so they lay on the counter for days and weeks, till they grew hard and dry, but the thoughts of the maiden became ever more tender and womanly. "Ah, well, it is enough for me that I have been able to live on the same counter with him," she said one day, when suddenly, crack, and she broke in 2. "Ah," said the gingerbread man to himself, "if she had only known of my love, she would have kept together a little longer." "And here they both are, and that is their history," said the cake man. "You think the history of their lives and their silent love, which never came to anything, very remarkable, and there they are for you." So saying, he gave Joanna the gingerbread man, who was still quite whole, and to Nude, the broken maiden, but the children had been so much impressed by the story that they had not the heart to eat the lovers up. The next day they went into the churchyard and took the 2 cake figures with them, and sat down under the church wall, which was covered with luxuriant ivy in summer and winter, and looked as if hung with rich tapestry. They stuck up the 2 gingerbread figures in the sunshine among the leaves, and then told the story, and all about the silent love which came to be nothing to a group of children. They called it love because the story was so lovely, and the other children had the same opinion. But when they turned to look at the gingerbread pair, the broken maiden was gone. A great boy, out of wickedness, had eaten her up. At first, the children cried about it, but afterwards, thinking very probably that the poor lover ought not to be left alone in the world, they ate him up too, but they never forgot the story. The 2 children still continued to play together by the elder tree and under the willow, and the little maiden sang beautiful songs with a voice that was clear as a bell. Nude, on the contrary, had not a note of music in him, but knew the words of the songs, and that, of course, is something. The people of Yoj, and even the rich wife of the man who kept the fancy shop, would stand and listen while Joanna was singing, and say, "She has really a very sweet voice." Those were happy days, but they could not last forever. The neighbors were separated. The mother of the little girl was dead, and her father had thoughts of marrying again and residing in the capital, where he had been promised a very lucrative appointment as messenger. The neighbors parted with tears. The children wept sadly, but their parents promised that they should write to each other at least once a year. After this, Gnud was bound apprentice to a shoemaker. He was growing a great boy, and could not be allowed to run wild any longer. Besides, he was going to be confirmed. Ah, How happy he would have been on that festal day in Copenhagen with little Joanna, but he still remained in Kjoj and had never seen the great city, though the town is not 5 miles from it. But far across the bay, when the sky was clear, the towers of Copenhagen could be seen, and on the day of his confirmation he saw distinctly the golden cross on the principal church glittering in the sun. How often his thoughts were with Joanna. But did she think of him? Yes. About Christmas came a letter from her father to Knud's parents, which stated that they were going on very well in Copenhagen, and mentioning particularly that Joanna's beautiful voice was likely to bring her a brilliant fortune in the future. She was engaged to sing at a concert, and she had already earned money by singing, out of which she sent her dear neighbors at Kjoj a whole $1 for them to make merry on Christmas Eve, and they were to drink her health. She had herself added this in a postscript, and in the same postscript she wrote, "Kind regards to Knud." The good neighbors wept, although the news was so pleasant, but they wept tears of joy. Knud's thoughts had been daily with Joanna, and now he knew that she also had thought of him, and the nearer the time came for his apprenticeship to end, the clearer did it appear to him that he loved Joanna, and that she must be his wife. And a smile came on his lips at the thought, and at one time he drew the thread so fast as he worked, and pressed his foot so hard against the knee strap, that he ran the awl into his finger. But what did he care for that? He was determined not to play the dumb lover, as both the gingerbread cakes had done. The story was a good lesson to him. At length he became a journeyman, and then for the first time he prepared for a journey to Copenhagen with his knapsack packed and ready. A master was expecting him there, and he thought of Joanna and how glad she would be to see him. She was now 17, and he 19 years old. He wanted to buy a gold ring for her in Kjoj, but then he recollected how far more beautiful such things would be in Copenhagen. So he took leave of his parents, and on a rainy day, late in the autumn, wandered forth on foot from the town of his birth. The leaves were falling from the trees, and by the time he arrived at his new master's in the great metropolis, he was wet through. On the following Sunday, he intended to pay his first visit to Joanna's father. When that day came, the new journeyman's clothes were brought out, and a new hat, which he had bought in Kjoj. The hat became him very well, for hitherto he had only worn a cap. He found the house that he sought easily, but had to mount so many stairs that he became quite giddy. It surprised him to find how people lived over one another in this dreadful town. On entering a room in which everything denoted prosperity, Joanna's father received him very kindly. The new wife was a stranger to him, but she shook hands with him and offered him coffee. "Joanna will be very glad to see you," said her father. "You have grown quite a nice young man. You shall see her presently. She is a good child, and is the joy of my heart, and please God, she will continue to be so. She has her own room now, and pays us rent for it." And the father knocked quite politely at a door, as if he were a stranger, and then they both went in. How pretty everything was in that room! A more beautiful apartment could not be found in the whole town of Kjoj. The queen herself could scarcely be better accommodated. There were carpets and rugs, and window curtains hanging to the ground. Pictures and flowers were scattered about. There was a velvet chair and a looking-glass against the wall, into which a person might be in danger of stepping, for it was as large as a door. All this Knud saw at a glance, and yet, in truth, he saw nothing but Joanna. She was quite grown up, and very different from what Knud had fancied her, and a great deal more beautiful. In all Kjoj there was not a girl like her, and how graceful she looked! Although her glance at first was odd and not familiar, but for a moment only, then she rushed towards him as if she would have kissed him. She did not, however, although she was very near it. Yes, she really was joyful at seeing the friend of her childhood once more, and the tears even stood in her eyes. Then she asked so many questions about Knud's parents and everything, even to the elder tree and the willow, which she called Elder Mother and Willow Father, as if they had been human beings. And so, indeed, they might be, quite as much as the gingerbread cakes. Then she talked about them, and the story of their silent love, and how they lay on the counter together and split in two, and then she laughed heartily, but the blood rushed into Knud's cheeks, and his heart beat quickly. Joanna was not proud at all. He noticed that through her he was invited by her parents to remain the whole evening with them, and she poured out the tea and gave him a cup herself, and afterwards she took a book and read aloud to them, and it seemed to Knud as if the story was all about himself and his love, for it agreed so well with his own thoughts. And then she sang a simple song, which, through her singing, became a true story, and as if she poured forth the feelings of her own heart. "Oh," he thought, "she knows I am fond of her." The tears he could not restrain rolled down his cheeks, and he was unable to utter a single word. It seemed as if he had been struck dumb. When he left, she pressed his hand and said, "You have a kind heart, Knud. Remain always as you are now." What an evening of happiness this had been! To sleep after it was impossible, and Knud did not sleep. At parting, Joanna's father had said, "Now, you won't quite forget us. You must not let the whole winter go by without paying us another visit," so that Knud felt free himself to go again the following Sunday evening, and so he did. But every evening after working hours, and they worked by candlelight then, he walked out into the town and through the street in which Joanna lived to look up at her window. It was almost always lighted up, and one evening he saw the shadow of her face quite plainly on the window blind. That was a glorious evening for him. His master's wife did not like his always going out in the evening, idling, wasting time, as she called it, and she shook her head. But his master only smiled and said, "He is a young man, my dear, you know." "On Sunday I shall see her," said Knud to himself, "and I will tell her that I love her with my whole heart and soul, and that she must be my little wife. I know I am now only a poor journeyman shoemaker, but I will work and strive and become a master in time. Yes, I will speak to her. Nothing comes from silent love. I learnt that from the gingerbread cake story." Sunday came, but when Knud arrived, they were all unfortunately invited out to spend the evening, and were obliged to tell him so. Joanna pressed his hand and said, "Have you ever been to the theater? You must go once. I sing there on Wednesday, and if you have time on that day, I will send you a ticket. My father knows where your master lives." How kind this was of her! And on Wednesday, about noon, Knud received a sealed packet with no address, but the ticket was inside, and in the evening Knud went, for the first time in his life, to a theater. And what did he see? Well, he saw Joanna, and how beautiful and charming she looked. He certainly saw her being married to a stranger, but that was all in the play and only a pretense. Nude knew that well. She could never have the heart, he thought, to send him a ticket to go and see it if it had been real. So he looked on, and when all the people applauded and clapped their hands, he shouted hurrah. He could see that even the king smiled at Joanna and seemed delighted with her singing. How small Knud felt, but then he loved her so dearly and thought she loved him, and the man must speak the first word, as the ginger maiden had thought. Ah, how much there was for him in that childish story! As soon as Sunday arrived, he went again, and felt as if he were about to enter on holy ground. Joanna was alone to welcome him. Nothing could be more fortunate. "I am so glad you are come," she said. "I was thinking of sending my father for you, but I had a presentiment that you would be here this evening. The fact is, I wanted to tell you that I am going to France. I shall start on Friday. It is necessary for me to go there if I wish to become a first-rate performer." Poor Knud! It seemed to him as if the whole room was whirling round with him. His courage failed, and he felt as if his heart would burst. He kept down the tears, but it was easy to see how sorrowful he was. "You honest, faithful soul!" she exclaimed, and the words loosened Knud's tongue, and he told her how truly he had loved her, and that she must be his wife. And as he said this, he saw Joanna change color and turn pale. She let his hand fall, and said earnestly and mournfully, "Knud, do not make yourself and me unhappy. I will always be a good sister to you, one in whom you can trust, but I can never be anything more." And she drew her white hand over his burning forehead and said, "God gives strength to bear a great deal if we only strive ourselves to endure." At this moment her stepmother came into the room, and Joanna said quickly, "Knud is unhappy because I am going away." And it appeared as if they had only been talking of her journey. "Come, be a man," she added, placing her hand on his shoulder. "You are still a child, and you must be good and reasonable, as you were when we were both children and played together under the willow tree." Knud listened, but he felt as if the world had slid out of its course. His thoughts were like a loose thread fluttering to and fro in the wind. He stayed, although he could not tell whether she had asked him to do so. But she was kind and gentle to him. She poured out his tea and sang to him, but the song had not the old tone in it, although it was wonderfully beautiful and made his heart feel ready to burst. And then he rose to go. He did not offer his hand, but she seized it and said, "Will you not shake hands with your sister at parting, my old playfellow?" And she smiled through the tears that were rolling down her cheeks. Again, she repeated the word brother, which was a great consolation certainly, and thus they parted. She sailed to France, and Knud wandered about the muddy streets of Copenhagen. The other journeymen in the shop asked him why he looked so gloomy, and wanted him to go and amuse himself with them, as he was still a young man. So he went with them to a dancing room. He saw many handsome girls there, but none like Joanna, and here, where he thought to forget her, she was more lifelike before his mind than ever. God gives us strength to bear much if we try to do our best, she had said, And as he thought of this, a devout feeling came into his mind, and he folded his hands. Then, as the violins played and the girls danced round the room, he started, for it seemed to him as if he were in a place where he ought not to have brought Joanna, for she was here with him in his heart, and so he went out at once. As he went through the streets at a quick pace, he passed the house where she used to live. It was all dark, empty, and lonely. But the world went on its course, and Knud was obliged to go on too. Winter came. The water was frozen, and everything seemed buried in a cold grave. But when spring returned, and the first steamer prepared to sail, Knud was seized with a longing to wander forth into the world, but not to France. So he packed his knapsack and traveled through Germany, going from town to town, but finding neither rest or peace. It was not until he arrived at the glorious old town of Nuremberg that he gained the mastery over himself and rested his weary feet, and here he remained. Nuremberg is a wonderful old city, and looks as if it had been cut out of an old picture book. The streets seem to have arranged themselves according to their own fancy, and as if the houses objected to stand in rows or rank and file. Gables with little towers, ornamented columns, and statues can be seen even to the city gate, and from the singular-shaped roofs, waterspouts formed like dragons or long, lean dogs extend far across to the middle of the street. Here, in the marketplace, stood Knud with his knapsack on his back, close to one of the old fountains which are so beautifully adorned with figures, scriptural and historical, and which spring up between the sparkling jets of water. A pretty servant maid was just filling her pails, and she gave Knud a refreshing draught. She had a handful of roses, and she gave him one, which appeared to him like a good omen for the future. From a neighboring church came the sounds of music, and the familiar tones reminded him of the organ at home in Kioge. So he passed into the great cathedral. The sunshine streamed through the painted glass windows and between two lofty, slender pillars. His thoughts became prayerful, and calm peace rested on his soul. He next sought out and found a good master in Nuremberg, with whom he stayed and learnt the German language. The old moat round the town had been converted into a number of little kitchen gardens, but the high walls, with their heavy-looking towers, are still standing. Inside these walls, the rope-maker twisted his ropes along a walk built like a gallery, and in the cracks and crevices of the walls elder bushes grow, and stretched their green boughs over the small houses which stand below. In one of these houses lived the master for whom Knud worked, and over the little garret window where he sat, the elder tree waved its branches. Here he dwelt through one summer and winter, but when spring came again, he could endure it no longer. The elder was in blossom, and its fragrance was so homelike that he fancied himself back again in the gardens of Kioge. So Knud left his master, and went to work for another who lived farther in the town, where no elder grew. His workshop was quite close to one of the old stone bridges, near to a water-mill, round which the roaring stream rushed and foamed always, yet restrained by the neighboring houses, whose old, decayed balconies hung over and seemed ready to fall into the water. Here grew no elder. Here was not even a flower pot, with its little green plant, but just opposite the workshop stood a great willow tree, which seemed to hold fast to the house for fear of being carried away by the water. It stretched its branches over the stream, just as those of the willow tree in the garden at Kioge had spread over the river. Yes, he had indeed gone from elder mother to willow father. There was a something about the tree here, especially in the moonlight nights, that went directly to his heart. Yet it was not in reality the moonlight, but the old tree itself. However, he could not endure it. And why? Ask the willow. Ask the blossoming elder. At all events, he bade farewell to Nuremberg and journeyed onwards. He never spoke of Joanna to anyone. His sorrow was hidden in his heart. The old childish story of the 2 cakes had a deep meaning for him. He understood now why the gingerbread man had a bitter almond in his left side. His was the feeling of bitterness, and Joanna, so mild and friendly, was represented by the honey cake maiden. As he thought upon all this, the strap of his knapsack pressed across his chest so that he could hardly breathe. He loosened it, but gained no relief. He saw but half the world around him. The other half he carried with him in his inward thoughts, and this is the condition in which he left Nuremberg. Not till he caught sight of the lofty mountains did the world appear more free to him. His thoughts were attracted to outer objects, and tears came into his eyes. The Alps appeared to him like the wings of the earth folded together. Unfolded, they would display the variegated pictures of dark woods, foaming waters, spreading clouds, and masses of snow. At the last day, thought he, the earth will unfold its great wings and soar upwards to the skies, there to burst like a soap bubble in the radiant glance of the deity. Ah, sighed he, that the last day were come. Silently he wandered on through the country of the Alps, which seemed to him like a fruit garden covered with soft turf. From the wooden balconies of the houses, the young lace-makers nodded as he passed. The summits of the mountains glowed in the red evening sunset, and the green lakes beneath the dark trees reflected the glow. Then he thought of the sea-coast by the Bay Gjöge with a longing in his heart that was, however, without pain. There, where the Rhine rolls onward like a great billow and dissolves itself into snowflakes, where glistening clouds are ever changing as if here was the place of their creation, while the rainbow flutters about them like a many-colored ribbon. There did Knud think of the water-mill at Gjöge, with its rushing, foaming waters. Gladly would he have remained in the quiet Rhenish town, but there were too many elders and willow trees. So he traveled onwards, over a grand, lofty chain of mountains, over rugged, rocky precipices, and along roads that hung on the mountain's side like a swallow's nest. The waters foamed in the depths below him. The clouds lay beneath him. He wandered on, treading upon alpine roses, thistles, and snow, with the summer sun shining upon him, till at length he bid farewell to the lands of the north. Then he passed on under the shade of blooming chestnut trees, through vineyards and fields of Indian corn, still conscious that the mountains were as a wall between him and his early recollections, and he wished it to be so. Before him lay a large, splendid city called Milan, and here he found a German master who engaged him as a workman. The master and his wife, in whose workshop he was employed, were an old, pious couple, and the two old people became quite fond of the quiet journeyman, who spoke but little, but worked more, and led a pious Christian life. And even to himself it seemed as if God had removed the heavy burden from his heart. His greatest pleasure was to climb, now and then, to the roof of the noble church, which was built of white marble. The pointed towers, the decorated and open cloisters, the stately columns, the white statues which smiled upon him from every corner and porch and arch. All, even the church itself, seemed to him to have been formed from the snow of his native land. Above him was the blue sky, below him the city and the wide-spreading plains of Lombardy, and towards the north the lofty mountains covered with perpetual snow. And then he thought of the church of Kyoge, with its red, ivy-clad walls, but he had no longing to go there. Here, beyond the mountains, he would die and be buried. 3 years had passed away since he left his home. 1 year of that time he had dwelt at Milan. One day his master took him into town, not to the circus in which riders performed, but to the opera, a large building, itself a sight well worth seeing. The 7 tiers of boxes, which reached from the ground to a dizzy height near the ceiling, were hung with rich silken curtains, and in them were seated elegantly dressed ladies with bouquets of flowers in their hands. The gentlemen were also in full dress, and many of them wore decorations of gold and silver. The place was so brilliantly lighted that it seemed like sunshine, and glorious music rolled through the building. Everything looked more beautiful than in the theater at Copenhagen, but then Joanna had been there, and could it be? Yes, it was like magic. She was here also, for when the curtain rose, there stood Joanna, dressed in silk and gold, and with a golden crown upon her head. She sang, he thought, as only an angel could sing, and then she stepped forward to the front and smiled, as only Joanna could smile, and looked directly at Knud. Poor Knud. He seized his master's hand and cried out loud, "Joanna!" But no one heard him, excepting his master, for the music sounded above everything. "Yes, yes, it is Joanna," said his master, and he drew forth a printed bill and pointed to her name, which was there in full. Then it was not a dream. All the audience applauded her and threw wreaths of flowers at her, and every time she went away, they called for her again, so that she was always coming and going. In the street, the people crowded round her carriage and drew it away themselves without the horses. Knud was in the foremost row and shouted as joyously as the rest, and when the carriage stopped before a brilliantly lighted house, Knud placed himself close to the door of her carriage. It flew open, and she stepped out. The light fell upon her dear face, and he could see that she smiled as she thanked them, and appeared quite overcome. Knud looked straight into her face, and she looked at him, but she did not recognize him. A man with a glittering star on his breast gave her his arm, and people said that the two were engaged to be married. Then Knud went home and packed up his knapsack. He felt he must return to the home of his childhood, to the elder tree and the willow. Ah, under that willow tree, a man may live a whole life in one single hour. The old couple begged him to remain, but words were useless. In vain they reminded him that winter was coming, and that the snow had already fallen on the mountains. He said that he could easily follow the track of the closely moving carriages, for which a path must be kept clear, and with nothing but his knapsack on his back, and leaning on his stick, he could step along briskly. So he turned his steps to the mountains, ascended one side and descended the other, still going northward till his strength began to fail, and not a house or a village could be seen. The stars shone in the sky above him, and down in the valley lights glittered like stars, as if another sky were beneath him. but his head was dizzy and his feet stumbled, and he felt ill. The lights in the valley grew brighter and brighter and more numerous, and he could see them moving to and fro. And then he understood that there must be a village in the distance, so he exerted his failing strength to reach it, and at length obtained shelter in a humble lodging. He remained there that night and the whole of the following day, for his body required rest and refreshment, and in the valley there was rain and a thaw. But early in the morning of the third day, a man came with an organ and played one of the melodies of home, and after that, Knud could remain there no longer, so he started again on his journey toward the north. He traveled for many days with hasty steps, as if he were trying to reach home before all whom he remembered should die, but he spoke to no one of this longing. No one would have believed or understood this sorrow of his heart, the deepest that can be felt by human nature. Such grief is not for the world. It's not entertaining even to friends, and poor Knud had no friends. He was a stranger, wandering through strange lands to his home in the north. He was walking one evening through the public roads. The country around him was flatter, with fields and meadows. The air had a frosty feeling. A willow tree grew by the roadside. Everything reminded him of home. He felt very tired, so he sat down under the tree, and very soon began to nod, then closed his eyes in sleep. Yet still he seemed conscious that the willow tree was stretching its branches over him. In his dreaming state, the tree appeared like a strong old man, the willow father himself, who had taken his tired son up in his arms to carry him back to the land of home, to the garden of his childhood, on the bleak, open shores of Kjoj. And then he dreamed that it was really the willow tree itself from Kjoj, which had traveled out into the world to seek him, and now had found him and carried him back into the little garden on the banks of the streamlet. And there stood Joanna, in all her splendor, with the golden crown on her head, as he had last seen her, to welcome him back. And then there appeared before him two remarkable shapes, which looked much more like human beings than when he had seen them in his childhood. They were changed, but he remembered that they were the two gingerbread cakes, the man and the woman, who had shown their best sides to the world and looked so good. "We thank you," they said to Knud, "for you have loosened our tongues. We have learnt from you that thoughts should be spoken freely, or nothing will come of them. And now something has come of our thoughts, for we are engaged to be married." Then they walked away, hand in hand, through the streets of Kjoj, looking very respectable on the best side, which they were quite right to show. They turned their steps to the church, and Knud and Joanna followed them, also walking hand in hand. There stood the church, as of old, with its red walls on which the green ivy grew. The great church doors flew open wide, and as they walked up the broad aisle, soft tones of music sounded from the organ. "Our master first," said the gingerbread pair, making room for Knud and Joanna. As they knelt at the altar, Joanna bent her head over him, and cold, icy tears fell on his face from her eyes. They were indeed tears of ice, for her heart was melting towards him through his strong love, and as her tears fell on his burning cheeks, he awoke. He was still sitting under the willow tree in a strange land, on a cold winter evening, with snow and hail falling from the clouds and beating upon his face. "That was the most delightful hour of my life," said he. "Although it was only a dream, oh, let me dream again." Then he closed his eyes once more and slept and dreamed. Towards morning, there was a great fall of snow. The wind drifted it over him, but he still slept on. The villagers came forth to go to church. By the roadside, they found a workman seated, but he was dead, frozen to death under a willow tree. The Pea Blossom. There were once 5 peas in one shell. They were green, the shell was green, and so they believed that the whole world must be green also, which was a very natural conclusion. The shell grew and the peas grew. They accommodated themselves to their position and sat all in a row. The sun shone without and warmed the shell, and the rain made it clear and transparent. It was mild and agreeable in broad daylight, and dark at night, as it generally is. And the peas, as they sat there, grew bigger and bigger, and more thoughtful as they mused, for they felt there must be something else for them to do.
"Are we to sit here forever?"
asked one.
"Shall we not become hard by sitting so long? It seems to me there must be something outside, and I feel sure of it."
And as weeks passed by, the peas became yellow, and the shell became yellow.
"All the world is turning yellow, I suppose,"
said they, and perhaps they were right. Suddenly they felt a pull at the shell. It was torn off and held in human hands, then slipped into the pocket of a jacket in company with other full pods.
"Now we shall soon be opened,"
said one, just what they all wanted.
"I should like to know which of us will travel furthest,"
said the smallest of the 5.
"We shall soon see now."
"What is to happen will happen," said the largest pea. Crack went the shell as it burst, and the 5 peas rolled out into the bright sunshine. There they lay in a child's hand. A little boy was holding them tightly, and said they were fine peas for his pea shooter, and immediately he put one in and shot it out.
"Now I am flying out into the wide world," said he. "Catch me if you can."
And he was gone in a moment.
"I,"
said the second,
"intend to fly straight to the sun. That is a shell that lets itself be seen, and it will suit me exactly."
And he went away.
"We will go to sleep wherever we find ourselves," said the 2 next. "We shall still be rolling onwards."
And they did certainly fall on the floor and roll about before they got into the pea shooter, but they were put in for all that.
"We shall go farther than the others,"
said they. "What is to happen will happen," exclaimed the last, as he was shot out of the pea shooter. And as he spoke, he flew up against an old board under a garret window and fell into a little crevice, which was almost filled up with moss and soft earth. The moss closed itself around him, and there he lay, a captive indeed, but not unnoticed by God. "What is to happen will happen," said he to himself. Within the little garret lived a poor woman who went out to clean stoves, chop wood into small pieces, and perform such like hard work, for she was strong and industrious. Yet she remained always poor, and at home in the garret lay her only daughter, not quite grown up, and very delicate and weak. For a whole year she had kept her bed, and it seemed as if she could neither live nor die.
"She is going to her little sister," said the woman. "I had but the 2 children, and it was not an easy thing to support both of them, but the good God helped me in my work, and took one of them to himself and provided for her. Now I would gladly keep the other one that was left to me, but I suppose they are not to be separated, and my sick girl will very soon go to her sister above."
But the sick girl still remained where she was. Quietly and patiently she lay all the day long, while her mother was away from home at her work. Spring came, and one morning early the sun shone brightly through the little window and threw its rays over the floor of the room. Just as Mother was going to her work, the sick girl fixed her gaze on the lowest pane of the window.
"Mother," she exclaimed, "what can that little green thing be that peeps in at the window? It's moving in the wind."
The mother stepped to the window and half opened it.
"Oh," she said, "there is actually a little pea which has taken root and is putting out its green leaves. How could it have got into this crack? Well now, here's a little garden for you to amuse yourself with."
So the bed of the sick girl was drawn nearer to the window, that she might see the budding plant, and the mother went out to her work.
"Mother, I believe I shall get well," said the sick child in the evening. "The sun has shone in here so brightly and warmly today, and the little pea is thriving so well. I shall get on better too, and go out into the warm sunshine again." "God grant it," said the mother, but she did not believe it would be so. But she propped up with a little stick the green plant which had given her child such pleasant hopes of life, so that it might not be broken by the winds. She tied the piece of string to the window-sill and to the upper part of the frame, so that the pea tendrils might twine round when it shot up. And it did shoot up. Indeed, it might almost be seen to grow from day to day. "Now really, here is a flower coming," said the old woman one morning, and now at last she began to encourage the hope that her sick daughter might really recover. She remembered that for some time the child had spoken more cheerfully, and during the last few days had raised herself in bed in the morning to look with sparkling eyes at her little garden, which contained only a single pea plant. A week after, the invalid sat up for the first time a whole hour, feeling quite happy by the open window in the warm sunshine, while outside grew the little plant, and on it a pink pea blossom in full bloom. The little maiden bent down and gently kissed the delicate leaves. This day, to her, like a festival. "Our Heavenly Father himself has planted that pea, and made it grow and flourish to bring joy to you and hope to me, my blessed child," said the happy mother, and she smiled at the flower as if it had been an angel from God. But what became of the other peas? Why, the one who flew out into the wide world and said, "Catch me if you can," fell into a gutter on the roof of a house and ended his travels in the crop of a pigeon. The 2 lazy ones were carried quite as far, for they also were eaten by pigeons, so they were at least of some use, but the 4th, who wanted to reach the sun, fell into a sink and lay there in the dirty water for days and weeks, till he had swelled to a great size. "I am getting beautifully fat," said the pea. "I expect I shall burst at last. No pea could do more than that, I think. I am the most remarkable of all the 5 which were in the shell.
and the sink confirmed the opinion. But the young maiden stood at the open garret window with sparkling eyes and the rosy hue of health on her cheeks. She folded her thin hands over the pea blossom and thanked God for what he had done.
"I," said the sink, "shall stand up for my pea."
She was good for nothing. The mayor stood at the open window. He looked smart, for his shirt frill, in which he had stuck a breastpin, and his ruffles were very fine. He had shaved his chin uncommonly smooth, although he had cut himself slightly, and had stuck a piece of newspaper over the place. "Hark ye, youngsters!" cried he. The boy to whom he spoke was no other than the son of a poor washerwoman who was just going past the house. He stopped and respectfully took off his cap. The peak of this cap was broken in the middle so that he could easily roll it up and put it in his pocket. He stood before the mayor in his poor but clean and well-mended clothes, with heavy wooden shoes on his feet, looking as humble as if it had been the king himself. "You are a good and civil boy," said the mayor. "I suppose your mother is busy washing the clothes down by the river, and you are going to carry that thing to her that you have in your pocket. It is very bad for your mother. How much have you got in it?" "Only half a quartern," stammered the boy in a frightened voice. "And she has had just as much this morning already?" "No, it was yesterday," replied the boy. "Do halves make a whole?" said the mayor. "She's good for nothing. What a sad thing it is with these people. Tell your mother she ought to be ashamed of herself. Don't you become a drunkard, but I expect you will, though. Poor child. There, go now." The boy went on his way with his cap in his hand, while the wind fluttered his golden hair till the locks stood straight up. He turned round the corner of the street into the little lane that led to the river, where his mother stood in the water by her washing bench, beating the linen with a heavy wooden bar. The floodgates at the mill had been drawn up, and as the water rolled rapidly on, the sheets were dragged along by the stream, and nearly overturned the bench, so that the washerwoman was obliged to lean against it to keep it steady. "I've been very nearly carried away," she said. "It is a good thing that you have come, for I want something to strengthen me. It is cold in the water, and I have stood here 6 hours. Have you brought anything for me?" The boy drew the bottle from his pocket, and the mother put it to her lips and drank a little. "Ah, how much good that does, and how it warms me," she said. "It is as good as a hot meal, and not so dear. Drink a little, my boy. You look quite pale. You're shivering in your thin clothes, and autumn has really come. Oh, how cold the water is! I hope I shall not be ill. But no, I must not be afraid of that. Give me a little more, and you may have a sip too, but only a sip. You must not get used to it, my poor dear child." She stepped up to the bridge on which the boy stood as she spoke, and came on shore. The water dripped from the straw mat which she had bound round her body, and from her gown. "I work hard and suffer pain with my poor hands," said she, "but I do it willingly, that I may be able to bring you up honestly and truthfully, my dear boy." At the same moment, a woman rather older than herself came towards them. She was a miserable-looking object, lame of one leg, and with a large, false curl hanging down over one of her eyes, which was blind. This curl was intended to conceal the blind eye, but it made the defect only more visible. She was a friend of the laundress, and was called, among the neighbors, Lame Martha with the curl.
"Oh, you poor thing! How you do work, standing there in the water!"
she exclaimed.
"You really do need something to give you a little warmth, and yet spiteful people cry out about the few drops you take."
And then Martha repeated to the laundress in a very few minutes all that the mayor had said to her boy, which she had overheard, and she felt very angry that any man could speak, as he had done, of a mother to her own child, about the few drops she had taken. And she was still more angry because, on that very day, the mayor was going to have a dinner party, at which there would be wine, strong, rich wine, drunk by the bottle.
"Many will take more than they ought, but they don't call that drinking. They are all right. You are good for nothing indeed,"
cried Martha indignantly.
And so he spoke to you in that way, did he, my child?"
said the washerwoman, and her lips trembled as she spoke.
"He says you have a mother who is good for nothing. Well, perhaps he is right, but he should not have said it to my child. How much has happened to me from that house!" "Yes," said Martha. "I remember you were in service there, and lived in the house when the mayor's parents were alive. How many years ago that is! Bushels of salt have been eaten since then, and people may well be thirsty."
And Martha smiled.
"The mayor's great dinner party today ought to have been put off, but the news came too late. The footman told me the dinner was already cooked when a letter came to say that the mayor's younger brother in Copenhagen is dead." "Dead?"
cried the laundress, turning pale as death.
"Yes, certainly," replied Martha. "But why do you take it so much to heart? I suppose you knew him years ago when you were in service there?" "Is he dead?" she exclaimed. "Oh, he was such a kind, good-hearted man. There are not many like him."
And the tears rolled down her cheeks as she spoke. Then she cried,
"Oh, dear me, I feel quite ill. Everything is going round me. I cannot bear it. Is the bottle empty?"
And she leaned against the plank.
"Dear me, you are ill, indeed," said the other woman. "Come, cheer up. Perhaps it will pass off. No, indeed, I see you are really ill. The best thing for me to do is to lead you home." But my washing yonder?" "I will take care of that. Come, give me your arm. The boy can stay here and take care of the linen, and I'll come back and finish the washing. It is but a trifle."
The limbs of the laundress shook under her, and she said,
"I have stood too long in the cold water, and I have had nothing to eat the whole day since the morning. Oh, kind heaven, help me to get home. I am in a burning fever. Oh, my poor child."
And she burst into tears, and he, poor boy, wept also, as he sat alone by the river, near to and watching the damp linen. The two women walked very slowly. The laundress slipped and tottered through the lane, and round the corner into the street where the mayor lived. and just as she reached the front of his house, she sank down upon the pavement. Many persons came round her, and lame Martha ran into the house for help. The mayor and his guests came to the window.
"Oh, it's the laundress," said he. "She has had a little drop too much. She is good for nothing. It is a sad thing for her pretty little son. I like the boy very well, but the mother is good for nothing."
After a while, the laundress recovered herself, and they led her to her poor dwelling and put her to bed. Kind Martha warmed a mug of beer for her, with butter and sugar. She considered this the best medicine, and then hastened to the river, washed and rinsed badly enough to be sure, but she did her best. Then she drew the linen ashore, wet as it was, and laid it in a basket. Before evening, she was sitting in the poor little room with the laundress. The mayor's cook had given her some roasted potatoes and a beautiful piece of fat for the sick woman. Martha and the boy enjoyed these good things very much, but the sick woman could only say that the smell was very nourishing, she thought. By and by, the boy was put to bed, in the same bed as the one in which his mother lay, but he slept at her feet, covered with an old quilt made of blue and white patchwork. The laundress felt a little better by this time. The warm beer had strengthened her, and the smell of the good food had been pleasant to her.
"Many thanks, you good soul," she said to Martha. "Now the boy is asleep, I will tell you all. He is soon asleep. How gentle and sweet he looks as he lies there with his eyes closed. He does not know how his mother has suffered, and heaven grant he never may know it. I was in service at the councilor's, the father of the mayor, and it happened that the youngest of his sons, the student, came home. I was a young wild girl then, but honest, that I can declare in the sight of heaven. The student was merry and gay, brave and affectionate. Every drop of blood in him was good and honorable. A better man had never lived on earth. He was the son of the house, and I was only a maid, but he loved me truly and honorably, and he told his mother of it. She was to him as an angel upon earth. She was so wise and loving. He went to travel, and before he started, he placed a gold ring on my finger, and as soon as he was out of the house, my mistress sent for me. Gently and earnestly she drew me to her, and spake as if an angel were speaking. She showed me clearly, in spirit and in truth, the difference there was between him and me. He is pleased now, she said, with your pretty face, but good looks do not last long. You have not been educated like he has. You were not equals in mind and rank, and therein lies the misfortune. I esteem the poor, she added. In the sight of God they may occupy a higher place than many of the rich, but here upon earth we must beware of entering upon a false track, lest we are overturned in our plans like a carriage that travels by a dangerous road. I know a worthy man, an artisan, who wishes to marry you. I mean Eric, the glove-maker. He is a widower, without children, and in a good position. Will you think it over?" Every word she said pierced my heart like a knife, but I knew she was right, and the thought pressed heavily upon me. I kissed her hand and wept bitter tears, and I wept still more when I went to my room and threw myself on the bed. I passed through a dreadful night. God knows what I suffered and how I struggled.
The following Sunday, I went to the house of God to pray for light to direct my path. It seemed like a providence that as I stepped out of church, Eric came towards me, and then there remained not a doubt in my mind. We were suited to each other in rank and circumstance. He was, even then, a man of good means, and I went up to him, and I took his hand and said, "Do you still feel the same for me?" "Yes, ever and always," said he. "Will you then marry a maiden who honors and esteems you, although she cannot offer you her love, but that may come?" "Yes, it will come," said he. And we joined our hands together, and I went home to my mistress. The gold ring which her son had given me I wore next to my heart. I could not place it on my finger during the daytime, but only in the evening when I went to bed. I kissed the ring till my lips almost bled, and then I gave it to my mistress, and told her that the banns were to be put up for me and the glove-maker the following week. Then my mistress threw her arms round me and kissed me. She did not say that I was good for nothing. Very likely I was better then than I am now, but the misfortunes of this world were unknown to me then. At Michaelmas we were married, and for the first year everything went well with us. We had a journeyman and an apprentice, and you were our servant, Martha.
"Ah, yes, and you were a dear good mistress," said Martha. "I shall never forget how kind you and your husband were to me."
"Yes, those happy years when you were with us, although we had no children at first. The student I never met again, yet I saw him once, although he did not see me. He came to his mother's funeral. I saw him looking pale as death and deeply troubled, standing at her grave, for she was his mother. Some time after, when his father died, he was in foreign lands and did not come home. I know that he never married. I believe he became a lawyer. He had forgotten me, and even when we met, he would not have known me, for I have lost all my good looks, and perhaps that is all for the best."
And then she spoke of the dark days of trial when misfortune had fallen upon them.
"We had $500, said she, "and there was a house in the street to be sold for $200, so we thought it would be worth our while to pull it down and build a new one in its place, so it was bought. The builder and the carpenter made an estimate that the new house would cost $120 to build. Eric had credit, so he borrowed the money in the chief town. But the captain who was bringing it to him was shipwrecked, and the money lost. Just about this time, my dear sweet boy, who lies sleeping there, was born, and my husband was attacked with a severe, lingering illness. For 3/4 of a year, I was obliged to dress and undress him. We were backwards in our payments. We borrowed more money, and all that we had was lost and sold. And then my husband died. Since then, I have worked and toiled and striven for the sake of the child. I have scrubbed and washed both coarse and fine linen, but I have not been able to make myself better off, and it was God's will. In his own time he will take me to himself, but I know he will never forsake my boy."
And then she fell asleep. In the morning she felt much refreshed, and strong enough, as she thought, to go on with her work.
But as soon as she stepped into the cold water, a sudden faintness seized her. She clutched at the air convulsively with her hand, took one step forward, and fell. Her head rested on dry land, but her feet were in the water. Her wooden shoes, which were only tied on by a wisp of straw, were carried away by the stream, and thus she was found by Martha when she came to bring her some coffee. In the meantime, a messenger had been sent to her house by the mayor to say that she must come to him immediately, as he had something to tell her. It was too late. A surgeon had been sent for to open a vein in her arm, but the poor woman was dead. "She has drunk herself to death," said the cruel mayor. In the letter containing the news of his brother's death, it was stated that he had left in his will a legacy of $600 to the glovemaker's widow, who had been his mother's maid, to be paid with discretion in large or small sums to the widow or her child. "There was something between my brother and her, I remember," said the mayor. "It is a good thing that she is out of the way, for now the boy will have the whole. I will place him with honest people to bring him up, that he may become a respectable working man." And the blessings of God rested upon these words. The mayor sent for the boy to come to him, and promised to take care of him, but most cruelly added that it was a good thing that his mother was dead, for she was good for nothing. They carried her to the churchyard in which the poor were buried. Martha strewed sand on the grave and planted a rose tree upon it, and the boy stood by her side. "Oh, my poor mother!" he cried, while the tears rolled down his cheeks. "Is it true what they say, that she was good for nothing?" "No, indeed, it is not true," replied the old servant, raising her eyes to heaven. "She was worth a great deal. I knew it years ago, and since the last night of her life, I am more certain of it than ever. I say she was a good and worthy woman, and God who is in heaven knows I am speaking the truth, though the world may say, even now, she was good for nothing." We hope that you've enjoyed this installment, which is volume 18 in the fairy tales of Hans Christian Andersen. Please like the video, subscribe to the channel, hit the notification bell, and share our channel with your friends. Pass on the gift of storytelling and entertainment. It's free. It's available 24 hours a day around the world. Thank you for considering this. Take care of yourselves, and as always, please have sweet dreams.